Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So the RGB10 Max has been out for about a month now, and if you've seen any of my previous videos, you know that I really enjoy this device. In fact, over the past few weeks, this has become my default device to play games on. That's how much I like it. I love the big screen on this device, and the really comfortable buttons. But one thing I'm not a huge fan of is the color options that are available for this device. You know, the orange one here kind of looks like an orange creamsicle, and I do like how distinct it is, but at the same time, it's still a little bit too bright and bold for me. And the black version of this device actually has the opposite problem. I find that by being all black like this, it kind of doesn't have its own distinct character. It's just a little bit boring to me. And you know, because I have two of these devices here at the house, I thought to myself, well, what would happen if I swapped out the buttons? So let's have a look. This is what I'm calling the Tiger version of the RGB10 Max. As you can see, I switched out all of the accessories with the black versions. And I really enjoy the look of this one. It gives it a real nice muted color to it, and to me it reminds me of a tiger. But other people are calling it the Halloween version, and I'm sure if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you're going to love it. Now this one I'm calling the Panda version. I really like the contrast of the black shell and the white buttons and analog sticks. It reminds me of a Nintendo Switch Lite, but I like it a lot better because this dark black looks really good in contrast with the white buttons. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to mod these two devices and swap out the buttons. In addition, I'll show you how to get buttons of your own, or how to just buy the Panda version right now on AliExpress. On top of that, we'll do a couple other internal mods as well, just so we can get the most bang for our buck with the RGB10 Max. So first things first, I recommend you go to the PowKiddy Shenzhen store, and I'll have a link to this in the video description. But as you can see here, they have a listing for the RGB10 series, and you can see right off the bat, they already have the Panda version listed here. And I think it's super cool that they're actually even using the name that I came up with when I first showed off this mod on my YouTube page. On top of that, if you scroll down a little bit more on the storefront, you'll actually find the buttons themselves, and you can just buy those. And they have it listed for $13 for the buttons, or $20 to include the analog sticks as well. And if you're up for it, you can even buy a new case as well. But I didn't have any of that stuff available when I first got started, so let me show you how to actually change out the buttons yourself if you happen to have two. You're going to want to use some tweezers to pull out these rubber pads here. And then to open up the device itself, all it takes is a Phillips screwdriver, and you have these four little screws here. Once you have the screws out, you just have to pry your thumbnail between the back and the front of the case. Each side has a couple little clips, you just need to run your fingers across them. Once those are done, just slowly pry the back away from the front. First thing is to disconnect the battery and the speaker. So here's the battery here, 4200 milliamp hours. It seems to be a pretty long battery, and it's also fairly thin, so I'm not sure you're going to be able to use something thicker like the Odrego Super battery on this. I'm worried it's going to press up against the CPU here. So let's take a look at the internals of the device real quick. Here you can see the two ribbon cables for the analog sticks. And this is the ribbon cable for the display. Right here is the Wi-Fi chip. And then dead center is the CPU. And then the 1 gig of RAM. And there's other stuff on here, but let's not focus on that too much. Let's just actually take the device apart. So first thing, take off the shoulder buttons, and then the SD card, and then gently pry up the connectors for the ribbon cables. On the left, you're going to want to remove the ribbon cable so that you can access a screw for the PCB. And there are 5 PCB screws altogether, they're all silver. Okay, so here's the PCB here. One thing to note here is the Wi-Fi toggle will often get connected to the PCB, so make sure you don't lose that. It's the smallest part on this device. Next, let's remove the analog sticks. Now let's remove the rubber membrane from the D-pad and the face buttons, as well as the D-pad and the face buttons. After that, you have the start and select and function buttons. These are all the same, so don't worry about getting them mixed up. And then finally, the last buttons to remove are the volume rocker, and then the power and reset buttons, which are actually connected by a small piece of plastic. Be very gentle with this one. Okay, now we've fully disassembled the device here. So now let's do the same with the orange one. Same thing here, we're going to remove the rubber pads, remove the 4 screws, use our thumb to remove the case, battery and speaker cable, ribbon cables, and then the screws holding the PCB together. I found with the orange model in particular, it's actually easier to disassemble because the white buttons really stand out from the case. Either way, the process is the exact same between the two models. Now, one thing that is different about this device is that the screen doesn't sit flush with the case itself. So we'll take care of that here later in the video. But first, I have another experiment. So I bought these copper shims off of Amazon, and so I want to see what it's like to put some heat sinks into these devices. Luckily, this kit actually comes with thermal tape, so it's just a matter of cutting the tape down to size, adding it to the CPU, and then adding the copper shim. And then I recommend maybe pushing down for a minute or two, just to make sure it's firmly on there. And that's it. I'm going to do it for both models and see how it goes. I'm a tiny bit worried about it just because the thermal pad is pretty big, and I want to make sure the heatsink here doesn't press up against the battery and create a thermal connection. So I'll keep an eye on this in the next few weeks. Okay, back to this screen here. So as you can see here, they did not do a good job of gluing the display to the case itself. And this might be fixed in later shipments, but if you do have this problem, let's fix it together. Now, the only special equipment you're going to need to get this done is a hairdryer. And unfortunately, I can't use the hairdryer at my desk because it blows fuses at my desk. So I'm going to go into our bathroom and actually use the hairdryer. I'm going to keep it about 4 inches from the panel itself and just kind of blow warm air all over the LCD panel for probably about 3 minutes or so. And don't worry about damaging the panel, that's not going to happen at that level of heat. It's just hot enough to loosen the adhesive on the display itself and nothing else. So just use a hairdryer, just run it over your device for a few minutes, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so here I am with my warm panel here. And initially I thought I was going to have to use a spudger to go all the way around the display, but what I learned is that the display is not glued together at all. It's just using a couple pieces of adhesive tape. So when I pulled it loose, you can see that it's actually in the center of the display. So what I recommend when you're using your hairdryer is just concentrate on those two parts on the device itself. So what I want to do is make sure that this display doesn't come loose anymore. So I'm going to use this glue here, it's called B7000 glue. And this is a common electronic glue that you can find on Amazon.com for very cheap. I'll leave links to this below as well. So a little goes a long way with this glue. I'm just going to leave enough so that I can actually visibly see it. I'm also only going to keep it to the right side of the display because that's the only area that I had any issues. So it's more like a complement to the original adhesive tape. So once I've added the glue, my next step is to reinsert the display. From there, I'm just going to buff out any glue that I find around the outside. So one very important step while you're working on this, in addition to getting rid of all that excess glue, is to make sure that your forehead is reflected in the video camera and that there's no way to remove it. It's totally not embarrassing, just go with it. So remember, make sure to get all that excess glue out, but it's equally important to make sure that your dumb forehead is showing up on the display. I don't know, maybe I should do a face reveal at some point. Let me know what you think. Okay, so the most important step of this is to make sure that the adhesive sticks to the device. So we're going to use some books to weigh it down. This is my favorite part of any of the videos. I get to tell you some book recommendations. In previous videos, I've talked about Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, and I've also talked about Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion, which is just a beautifully written book. Today, I want to talk about Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. Now, this is one of my favorite books in a specific genre called magical realism. The idea here is that basically someone living an ordinary life is thrust into magical circumstances, and that's essentially this book in a nutshell. This is actually not my favorite Neil Gaiman book. My favorite book of his is called The Graveyard Book, but unfortunately I don't have a print version of it, so I can't use it to hold this display down. Either way, Neverwhere is a very charming book, and I highly recommend it. Okay, enough book talk. You really want to leave this for about an hour, maybe 2 hours. You can even do it overnight if you'd like. Either way, give it some time, and then come back. Okay, so here we are with a nicely glued screen. And as you can see, the screen is flush with the case. It's perfect. So now let's start reassembling everything. And reassembly is the exact same as the disassembly. Personally, I'm going to start with my analog sticks first. And then I'm just going to start adding the buttons, face buttons, D-pad, function buttons. It really doesn't matter which order you add these in. Make sure you add that Wi-Fi toggle to your PCB, and then slide it back in. I like to push it from the top and then down into the bottom. And then also make sure you don't pinch down your ribbon cables as you're putting everything back together. And as you start to screw things together, make sure that all the buttons are sitting flush and in their correct position, especially the ones at the top. Once you have the PCB in place, I would recommend go ahead and checking out all the buttons, making sure that they work properly. After that, you can go ahead and reseat your ribbon cables. I'll tell you, the one on the right is probably the hardest one to work with because it's at a weird angle, but just keep working on it and be very gentle with these ribbon cables. You don't want to damage them. Finally, I would add the shoulder buttons, and then reattach the battery and the speaker cables. And then you basically just want to snap the device together. And it's a really satisfying feeling when you snap them back together. Okay, so here we are with the Tiger version. Let's go ahead and put the SD card back in and boot it up. And I'm just verifying here, all the buttons work perfectly. So let's do the same with the Panda version here. One of the nice things about this model is that none of the function buttons or the face buttons need to be in any certain order. They're all completely interchangeable. It makes the device really easy to take apart and put back together. But same process here, let's go ahead and put all the buttons and the analog sticks together. We're going to add the PCB, screw the PCB in, and then reattach all the ribbon cables. And just like before, the one on the right is a pain in the butt, but just keep at it. You'll get it eventually. Snapping it all together again. And let's do the same thing here. Let's put in an SD card and make sure that it works perfectly. And look at that. All the buttons work perfectly. We got a success here. So here we are, Panda and Tiger versions of the PowKiddy RGB10 Max. I'm pretty excited about these, to be honest. I really appreciate the distinct color and flavor of each of these. I'm not really sure which one I like the best. This Tiger version is really interesting to me, but I also really like the classic color scheme of the Panda version. So the last thing I need to do, and I'm going to do it off camera, is to reinsert all of the screws and then add the rubber pads back in. And just like with the buttons, I'm going to swap out the colors too. Anyway, let me know what you think of these colors in the comments below, and I'll have links in the video description in case you want to buy new buttons or the Panda model itself. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming!